I knew something was wrong the moment the door at the end of my hallway appeared, because it hadn't been there the night before. And I'm the kind of person who notices that sort of thing immediately. The kind who counts steps in the dark and memorizes the way shadows fall so I don't have to turn on the lights. So when I woke up at 2:17 a.m. to the sound of my smoke detector chirping once, not enough to be an alarm, just enough to be wrong, and I stepped into the hallway barefoot, half asleep. I stopped cold because my hallway had gained a door, a narrow one, matte white, flush with the wall, no handle on my side, just a faint outline where a frame should be. And my first thought wasn't fear, but confusion, because the hallway in my apartment is simple and short and ends in a blank wall I've stared at for years while brushing my teeth, and I stood there listening to the hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen and the distant traffic outside, telling myself I was still dreaming, that this was one of those moments where your brain overlays something familiar with something imagined, except the longer I looked at it, the more detailed it became. The seam between door and wall sharp and clean, the paint slightly newer than the surrounding walls, and I remember reaching out, not to touch it, but to prove to myself I could, and stopping inches away because the air in front of it felt cooler, like standing near a window in winter. And that's when the chirp came again from the smoke detector, exactly the same as before. A single, deliberate sound, and I backed away, heart pounding now, because something in me understood, without logic or reason, that the door hadn't appeared by accident, and that acknowledging it had been a mistake. So I went back to bed and lay there staring at the ceiling, listening for footsteps that never came, and eventually fell asleep, telling myself I'd laugh about it in the morning. But in the morning, the door was still there, and it looked like it had always belonged, like the apartment had been built around it, and I was the one who was wrong. And when I tried to remember the blank wall that used to be there, I couldn't picture it clearly anymore. Just a vague sense of absence where something should have been. And that unsettled me more than the door itself. I didn't open it that day or the next, and I didn't talk about it to anyone, because every time I thought about explaining it, I felt ridiculous. And because there was a rule forming in my head that I didn't consciously decide on, but still obeyed. Don't draw attention to it. Don't ask questions. Don't open it. And the strange thing was how easy it was to live like that at first. How quickly the door became background noise in my life. Something I stepped around without looking directly at. Like a loose floorboard you learn to avoid. Except sometimes, late at night, I would catch it changing in ways so subtle I couldn't be sure they were real. The seam shifting slightly to the left, the paint tone warming or cooling depending on the time of day. And once, when I came home from work exhausted and irritable, I could have sworn it was breathing, not moving, just exhaling cold air in shallow, patient intervals. And I stood there holding my keys, telling myself I was projecting, that old buildings make noises and brains make patterns, until my phone buzzed with a notification from a number I didn't recognize that simply said, "Don't open it yet." And I dropped my keys on the floor because I hadn't told anyone about the door. Not my friends, not my family, not even the maintenance guy who came to fix my sink that same week and didn't seem to notice it at all, walking past it without a glance like it truly wasn't there for him. And when I asked, as casually as I could, if the building had any storage spaces or access panels in the hallways, he looked at me like I'd asked something deeply personal and said no and changed the subject. And I realized then that the door wasn't just something new in my apartment. It was selective, like it had chosen me. And that realization came with another rule, this one clearer. The door only existed when I was alone. I tested that rule carefully, inviting a friend over under the pretense of dinner, watching her walk down the hallway ahead of me, my heart racing as we reached the end. And there was nothing there, just the familiar blank wall I remembered so poorly now. and I felt a rush of relief so strong it made me lightheaded, until she left later that night, and the door slid back into place with a soft sound, like a held breath being released. And I understood that whatever was happening didn't want witnesses, or maybe couldn't tolerate them. And that made it feel more intentional, more aware. And I started to notice other patterns too. Small things at first, like how the door never appeared in photos or videos. No matter how hard I tried to capture it, my camera always showing the blank wall instead, or how it seemed slightly closer each time I passed it, reducing the length of the hallway by inches I couldn't measure but could feel. Like the space between my bedroom and the living room was slowly being eaten, and I would have moved out then if I could have. But there were reasons I stayed. Practical ones I told myself were more important than a door that might not even be real, and deeper ones I didn't want to examine, because the truth was that the door had started to feel familiar, almost comforting in a way I didn't like admitting, like a secret I shared with the apartment, with the building, with something older than both. And the nights I slept best were the nights I dreamed of standing in front of it, not opening it, just resting my hand against the cool surface and listening to the quiet on the other side, a quiet that felt full rather than empty, like a crowded room holding its breath. The messages started after that, always from different numbers, always short, never threatening, just informative in a way that felt rehearsed, like don't open it before it knocks or it will think you're impatient, or if you hear your name from behind it, wait until it says it wrong. And I told myself I should delete them, block the numbers. But I never did, because part of me wanted the rules, wanted the structure they provided, and because the messages knew things about me, small things, like how I hated the sound of my own name spoken softly, or how I always checked the locks twice before bed. And once, when I came home to find a faint scratch mark near the bottom of the door, I got a message within seconds that said that's normal. It's learning the shape of you. And I sat on the floor, shaking, my back against the opposite wall, trying not to imagine what learning my shape meant, trying not to imagine the hallway narrowing further until there was no room for me to pass. And that's when the knocking started. Not loud, not urgent, just a gentle, polite tap from the other side. Always 3 times, always at 3:11 a.m. And the first night it happened, I froze in bed, heart pounding, because I hadn't been told about knocking. And after the third knock, there was silence so deep it felt like pressure. And I lay there, waiting for something else to happen, for the door to open on its own, for footsteps, for my phone to buzz. But nothing did. And in the morning, the door looked unchanged, and I almost convinced myself I'd imagined it, until the second night, and the third, and by the fourth, I realized this was another rule being established, another test I didn't know how to pass, because the messages stopped then, and I was on my own, and I started to dread the sound of 3 taps in the dark, dread the way my body responded to it, a pull in my chest that felt like curiosity and homesickness twisted together. And during the day, I found myself lingering in the hallway, standing closer to the door than I needed to, listening for sounds that never came, until one afternoon, when I was standing there with my hand hovering an inch from the surface, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number that simply said, "Not yet." And I realized the messages hadn't stopped. They'd just been waiting for me to forget they existed. And that made me angry in a way I hadn't felt before, because I didn't like being managed, didn't like the idea that something was monitoring my patience, my restraint, my compliance. And that night, when the 3 taps came, I didn't hide under my blankets or pretend to sleep. I got out of bed and walked to the end of the hallway, stopping a foot away from the door, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. And I whispered, "Who is it?" immediately hating myself for speaking, because another rule snapped into place in my mind the moment the words left my mouth. Never ask it questions, and the door didn't answer. But the silence that followed felt different, charged, and I swear I could feel something on the other side leaning closer, listening, and I backed away slowly, every instinct screaming at me to run. And the knocking never came again after that, replaced instead by something worse, a sound like movement behind the door, slow and careful, as if something was rearranging itself, learning how to stand, how to wait. And the messages returned with a new tone, less instructional, more familiar, saying things like, "It likes that you're curious, and you'll understand when you see it." And once, late at night when I was scrolling through old photos on my phone, trying to ground myself in reality, I found a picture of my hallway taken months earlier, before the door appeared. And at the end of the hallway, faint but unmistakable, was the outline of a door that hadn't been there yet. And I realized then that the door hadn't appeared suddenly. It had been arriving slowly, seeding itself into my life before I was aware enough to resist. And that realization brought with it a deep, quiet fear, because if it could exist before it existed, then my sense of before and after meant nothing, and the rules I thought I was learning might not protect me at all. The hallway continued to shrink, not enough to notice at once, but enough that I started brushing my shoulders against the walls as I passed. And one morning, I woke up to find the door had gained a handle, not on my side, but I could see the indentation now, the suggestion of where it would be, and I knew, without being told, that this meant it was closer to being ready. And the messages confirmed it with a simple, "It's almost time." And I wanted to scream, to throw things, to break the door down or paint over it, or pretend it wasn't there. But every attempt to alter it failed, the paint peeling off as if it had never been applied, the wall refusing to crack, my tools slipping uselessly. And I started to wonder if the door was less a physical object and more a decision I'd already made, something that existed because I'd allowed it to, because I'd followed the rules. And the thought that terrified me most was that maybe the last rule, the one I hadn't been told yet, was the one that mattered, the one about opening it. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized how much of my life had begun to revolve around that unopened door. How many of my thoughts, my habits, my fears traced back to it. And I understood then that even if I never opened it, it had already changed me, already taken something. And that's when I started hearing my name, not from behind the door, but from the other end of the hallway, whispered in my own voice, just wrong enough to make my skin crawl. And the messages returned one last time to say, "Now you can open it." And I stood there in the narrow hallway, walls pressing in, door breathing softly, my name echoing from behind me. And I realized the final rule too late, because the last door in your hallway doesn't need to be opened to let something in. It just needs you to turn around. And I don't remember doing that. I only remember the feeling of being recognized, of being seen completely. And now the hallway is quiet again, the door at the end exactly where it's always been. And sometimes, when I wake up at 2:17 a.m. to a single, deliberate chirp from the smoke detector, I lie very still and listen to the sound of someone walking carefully outside my bedroom, learning the shape of my house. I stopped checking the time after that, because knowing the exact minute when the house decided to remind me it was awake only made it worse. And the walking outside my bedroom never sounded rushed or uncertain, just measured, like whoever, or whatever, was doing it had all the time in the world to get used to the space. And I learned quickly that pretending to be asleep was the worst thing I could do, because when my breathing slowed and my body went still, the footsteps stopped too, right outside the door, and the silence that followed felt expectant. So I started staying awake on purpose, staring at the faint line of light under my door, counting my breaths, making sure I existed loudly enough to be acknowledged from a distance, and that worked for a while, until one night the footsteps continued anyway, pacing back and forth as if disappointed, as if learning that I didn't behave the way I was supposed to anymore. And the next morning, the hallway was shorter again, so short that my bedroom door nearly touched the last door now, the white one, the one that had never needed to open. And I understood then that the hallway wasn't shrinking so much as rearranging itself around what mattered most, bringing me closer whether I cooperated or not. I stopped inviting people over entirely, not because I was afraid they'd see something, but because being alone felt required, like an ingredient I couldn't substitute. And the apartment responded to that obedience by becoming quieter, more settled, as if pleased. The refrigerator hum evening out, the pipes no longer knocking, everything smoothing itself into a version of normal that felt rehearsed. And I could almost believe I'd imagined the worst of it, if not for the way my reflection started lagging behind me in the bathroom mirror. Just a fraction of a second, just long enough to make me doubt which version of me was leading. And I remembered one of the earlier messages, the ones I hadn't understood at the time, about patience and timing. And I wondered if the door hadn't been the point at all, just the first visible sign that the rules of the space had changed, and I was slow to catch up. Sleep became unreliable, not because I couldn't fall asleep, but because waking up felt optional, like something I had to earn each morning. And on the days I woke up groggy and disoriented, the hallway felt longer again, forgiving, while on the days I woke alert and anxious, it was tight and close, the white door almost brushing my shoulder as I passed, and I began to sense a feedback loop, a quiet negotiation between my state of mind and the shape of my home, as if it were adjusting itself based on how ready I seemed. I tried leaving once, packing a bag and opening my front door, but the hallway stretched impossibly long behind me then, the white door receding into the distance no matter how far I walked toward the exit. And I stood there with my hand on the doorknob, bag heavy at my side, realizing that leaving wasn't forbidden. It was simply inconvenient in a way that drained my will to try. And when I finally let go and turned back, the hallway snapped back to its shortened length, with a feeling like relief, and the apartment settled again, satisfied. The messages stopped completely after that, not because I didn't need them anymore, but because I didn't need to be told what was expected, and I found myself following new rules without ever naming them, like never standing with my back to the white door for too long, or never speaking my own name out loud inside the apartment, or never closing my bedroom door all the way. Because on the one night I did, just to see what would happen, the footsteps paused on the other side and stayed there until morning, close enough that I could hear breathing that matched mine perfectly. And when I opened the door at dawn, there was no one there, just the hallway, patient and unchanged. Sometimes I catch myself thinking about the door the way you think about an unanswered message, with a low-level itch of curiosity that never quite goes away. And I have to remind myself that opening it was never the real risk. That attention is what makes things permanent, and I do my best not to look directly at it as I pass, even though I can feel it doing the opposite, tracking me with an awareness that doesn't need eyes. And on nights when the smoke detector chirps once and only once, I lie still and listen to the careful movement in my home and tell myself that as long as I don't turn around, as long as I don't acknowledge how familiar the presence feels now, I can pretend this is still my apartment and not a place that remembers me better than I remember myself. But sometimes, just before sleep takes me, I get the quiet, unsettling sense that the hallway is no longer leading anywhere at all, that it's simply waiting, and that whatever learned the shape of my house is almost finished learning the shape of me.